Strategic planning to oust President Bashar al-Assad. Syrian rebels acquire more weapons in an attempt to hit Damascus and Aleppo once more. It's growing time in the United States as President Barack Obama and Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney try to make last-minute attempts to swing states' voters. And when we come back, we look at how Ivorian musicians are drawing the coattails at the end of a symbolic reconciliation tour. Welcome back. A consortium of Ivorian musicians have been touring the length and breadth of the country in an attempt to unify people of the various political divide. The symbolic tour was, among other things, meant to restore hope and confidence in the masses after last year's post-election violence. As we in this report, many Ivorians are happy about the initiative.
After 2 weeks of concerts across Côte d'Ivoire, the Magic System took to the stage one last time on Saturday in Abidjan. This was the closing performance of the tour for peace and reconciliation.
The musicians came out for peace. When you see the faces of Ivorians, you know that they don't want to suffer anymore. They want to have fun.
Like Ciro, many local artists took turns on the mic. And Ivorian music stars like Alpha Blondy and Tiken John Fakoli were also in the concert. Thousands of people attended to turn the page on post-electoral violence that ravaged the country a year and a half ago.
There are several singers in Côte d'Ivoire who have been singing since the beginning that war is no good. I don't know if they're deaf, but they never understand.
Les Grts were also on the program. This group, which composed the music for Laurent Gbagbo's campaign, fled the country after the fall of the ex-president. They now expect a lot from the country's politicians.
The message that we could send, we have. It's now up to the politicians. That's what I always say. It's now up to the politicians to sit down and to talk.
Despite the difficulties facing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the absence of dialogue between the two main political parties, Ivorians were out for a good time on Saturday. They came out to express their desire for change while dancing into the night.
A tight presidential race in what has become an increasingly politically polarized country could be a recipe for a very long night as the vote gets tallied. So-called poll watchers from both parties will monitor this vote. CNN's Joe John reports, critics say some of the watchers need to be watched themselves.
In South Florida and in Cincinnati, Ohio, as early voting comes to a close. And those aren't the only crowds this hotly contested election is attracting.
10,000 grassroots and legal volunteers across the country on Election Day.
Everywhere. They're going to be everywhere. They've trained people in 50 states to legally poll watch.
Lawyers and poll watch stripes descending on Ohio and across the country in search of any issues that need to be challenged.
We're looking for long lines that might be a result of machines breaking down, poll workers that might be asking the wrong questions, asking for ID when they shouldn't be.
Groups like the left-leaning Election Protection have been training for weeks, so they're ready to respond to any problems at the polls in real time.
With all the changes nationally in the voting laws, I think we're prepared for there to be a significant amount of confusion on Election Day.
But controversy over how some of the organizations do their job. Poll watching has become a partisan business.
What do you think of the election protection people?
Well, look, they have problems.
Former Justice Department lawyer Christian Adams now represents True the Vote, a Tea Party-affiliated group with a simple goal.
Free and fair elections. True the Vote stands for election integrity. Follow the law, period.
But True the Vote has real critics of their own from the left.
True the Vote has consistently challenged the voting rights of legitimate voters. We must address anybody who tries to deny anybody that right to vote. And I consider it criminal. I can consider it unpatriotic. And I think it is very and highly offensive.
A claim Adams does not take lightly.
They're liars. They're bearing false witness against law-abiding citizens who are doing no more than observing the process, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
Whatever the election watchers find, it may ultimately be up to super lawyers like Ted Olson to determine whether to go to court. Olson, a Romney advisor, led Republicans to victory in the Supreme Court battle between George W. Bush and Al Gore in 2000.
I'm clearing my calendar just in case I need to be ready for the next 5 weeks.
He says if elections officials want to avoid litigation, they shouldn't change direction in the middle of the game.
If you follow the rules that were in place on Election Day with respect to counting the ballots, then the presumptive outcome will be respected when the Electoral College votes are counted.
But the truth is there could be other changes to the rules, especially as states affected by the superstorm get ready for the election. Joe John, CNN, Washington.
We'll take our second break now. How close to it? Welcome back. The Big Four were absent from the business end of the Paris Masters this week, but the excitement was provided by a qualifier from Poland. The 21-year-old produced a thrilling run, plowing through a series of top 20 players to reach the first final of his career. The world number 5 David Ferreira was the final hurdle to clear. We have more on that story and other tennis news from the FAD Cup.
By getting this far, and in post-match interviews throughout the week he's really struggled to explain his success, but in the end the final proved a bridge too far. Although he had his moments against the stubborn Ferrer, he was ultimately beaten in straight sets. Janovic got a break there in the second, but Ferrer responded with back-to-back breaks of his own. A nice return from the Spaniard there to set up an easy win. Out of straight sets win 6-4, 6-3, and it was an emotional win for Ferrer. This was his first Masters Series title.
And before we go, a reminder of our headlines. More volunteers have turned up for harvesting at President Jammeh's farms in the West Coast region. The community of Lamen has decorated 24 British nationals with honorary citizenship titles for contributing towards the development of the village. Ivorian musicians have ended their symbolic reconciliation tour of the country after 2 weeks in an attempt to appease the masses following last year's post-election violence. And presidential candidates in the United States, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, are making last-minute efforts to woo voters in swing states. This has 10,000 people receive approval to monitor the polls across the country. That brings us to the end of this edition of the news. Thanks for the pleasure of your company. Stay tuned and enjoy Grts. وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة